What's up guys, you're watching Life at TCG. Video for you today is on Legacy Death Shadow. Now, if you've been following my Legacy content for the past few months or so, you might remember that in addition to this Shadow list, I also enjoy Jeskai Control. So you might be thinking, have you got a list for us with the new Staff of Storyteller? Artifact makes a 1/1 token, draws cards. I've been trying that for the past couple of weeks. Can't find a build of it that I like. It's been very disappointing, very clunky. For some reason, the deck just doesn't feel that good anymore, and I can't quite figure out why. It might be because that blue decks are like a lot more underrepresented in the metagame right now, so your planeswalkers that were previously really strong, like your Narset, your Teferi, much less effective versus the non-blue decks, because Narset doesn't hurt them as much, they're not drawing so many cards. Teferi doesn't hurt them as much, they're not playing the counter spells. You know, these decks like Reanimator or Painter or whatever, you know, the 3-mana blue cards are much worse, and these enemy decks are much more popular. So I suspect that might be the reason why I haven't been feeling that excited about Jeskai Control, even though I do think that Staff of the Storyteller card is quite strong. I think it has some potential, but I just haven't quite figured out where to take it, so to speak. But yeah, that's that. We're not talking about Jeskai in this video anymore. We're talking about Death Shadow, which is what I've moved back to now that I'm not happy with the Jeskai deck. So let's get into it. Now there's a few, let's say a couple distinct builds of this blue-black Death Shadow. Of course, most immediately in the past I was playing Grixis, because I thought the red splash for Expressive Iteration was very good. That's banned, so you can't do that anymore. But in terms of just blue-black, there's a version of the deck that plays Grief as well as Reanimate, so that you can sort of scam people, is what the kids like to say. You know, if you turn one Grief, then you reanimate it, they discard 2 cards, you have 3/2. That was very good when the White Initiative was more popular, because if you stole the initiative thing and you reanimated it, that was often free win on the spot. The Grief had Menace, which was relevant in that matchup because you needed to hit them to take the initiative. If you griefed them, because their hand was very synergy dependent with like Chrome Mox and needing to have the initiative guy to ramp into all of that, the extra targeted discard was also important. But of course the initiative deck basically got taken out along with Expressive Iteration in that round of bans. So there's less metagame incentive to use that Grief Reanimate build anymore. And I don't like the inconsistency issues. Like, Unmask is not a card you want to be playing in this kind of fear grindy deck. Like 2-for-1ing yourself in that way is a bit too much. Of course you can undo that with the Reanimate, but you don't always have that available. You can play more Street Wraith, for example, to make your Reanimate more consistent, but like a 3-power attacker for no value is not on plan with either your Grief Attrition plan or your like Death Shadow beatdown plan. So that doesn't really work. Like, being a Xerox deck that's trying to play on like 1 or 2 lands for the virtual card advantage, and then at the same time, like, you have game states where you want to hit 4 land drops so you can hard cast your Grief, like that tension is very awkward a lot of the time as well. So long story short, there's no Grief in this list. It's a much more, you could call it like the stock build or the standard build, something like that. So I'm also not playing the card Delver of Secrets. Now, I've been against playing that card in Legacy Death Shadow for a long time. I don't think it's the right fit. It doesn't really make sense with what the deck's trying to do. I think the general consensus is most people have come around to this idea that this deck is not really a Delver deck per se. Rather than trying to like put your opponent under pressure from turn one and like aggro them out, you're much more of a like attrition deck that's trying to trade resources, make sure you're left with the like last biggest thing standing, which is not very effective if your last thing is just a Delver of Secrets, right? It's just 1 3-power creature. Delver is good when you play like Delver turn 1 and then you have to play like 1 or 2 other Delvers or like a Dragon Rage Channelers on turn 2 as well, and now suddenly your opponent's under all that pressure to deal with it. But that's not what this deck is doing, right? And it's very hard to do that with this deck because you can't really play Death Shadow on turn 1 or even turn 2 a lot of the time. So yeah, so there's no Delver of Secrets either. So what is in the deck? Let's talk about that. So we have 4 Death Shadow, 4 Murktide Regent, and 4 Baleful Strix. Baleful Strix, if you're used to that mentality of like your Daze decks being these sort of like hybrid aggro decks, like old school Canadian, where you had the like very, very low curve, you play like Nibble, Mongoose, Stifle, things like that. Baleful Strix looks very out of place in that mentality of deck because it's like a not very aggressive 2-mana creature, very slow, but the 2-for-1 is very good. What this deck, this blue-black deck, is trying to do is just trade resources as efficiently as possible. Baleful Strix is one of the ways to do that. Against control, it's like a free threat that they eventually do have to answer somehow. That's important. When you're losing life to your various shocklands and other effects, you want to have some good blockers to protect you while you're attacking with your big creatures, so Baleful Strix does exactly that. Yeah, it's just a very, very good card for the deck overall. So that's the creatures, these 11. I'm playing 0 Street Wraith as well. I don't think it's necessary. Street Wraith is okay. The problem is that when you build your deck with Street Wraith in it, and your deck also has 4 Force of Wills in it, that's already 8 cards that are pretty bad against Delver. And then you also have like 4 Daze, which are not very good against Delver on the draw, and 4 Thoughtseize, which are like not that good against Delver either, most of the time, especially on play, because you don't want to simplify the game as much when you're already down a card. You would much rather like build up a bit so you can safely cast your Strix and grind them out that way. So the point is that Wraith is not a good card versus Delver, and once you start putting Wraith in your main deck, you have a lot of cards that you want to board out versus Delver, and you don't have enough space in your sideboard to accommodate all these like anti-Delver cards. So that's a big problem with playing Street Wraith, I think. Even though it's like most matchups, the extra life loss is like neutral or good, and having extra target for Reanimate can be good as well. But on the balance, I don't think Street Wraith is a good card in this deck. Getting into the 4-op spells, just maximizing all the best options we have available. 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Snuff Out, 4 Ponder, 4 Brainstorm, 4 Daze, and 4 Force of Will. Not everybody's playing 4 Snuff Out, but usually 4 of all of these other ones are very stock. I think like the efficiency of Snuff Out is just too strong. Without Wraith, you can afford the life loss. Basically, you just have to like play around it. I'm not playing any other removal in the main deck, so if my opponent resolves it, Sheoldred, I just say, well, good job, you got me. But I think that's fine, just because the 0 mana removal of the Snuff Out is way too powerful. I do have other removal in the sideboard, so you're not like totally cold to it over the entire match. The other flexible spells, 3 Hymn to Tourach. Not 4 because you have quite bad diminishing returns on this card. If they're already hellbent, then obviously you don't want to draw any more copies of it. And versus attrition decks that use their own graveyard, obviously Uro is the reason why this card fell out of favor. But that's a relatively small proportion of the metagame right now, especially because Jeskai is now relatively gaining popularity compared to the last format where Jeskai was considered much weaker than 4-color. 4-color still exists, of course. The Anurag special is always existing in Legacy, but yeah, most other matchups this card is perfect. Just like Baleful Strix, it's very efficient 2-for-1 for only 2 mana, extremely disruptive. Yep, no complaints with him to Tourach usually. Then we also have 2 copies of Reanimate. Just makes the deck a little bit more threat dense. It's also a very good defensive card because you can reanimate Baleful Strix with it. And then against various opponents, you Thoughtseize or you him to Tourach or you kill their creatures, then you can reanimate those too. Yeah, it's just a flexible, pretty strong card. Lets you get powerful threats for only 1 mana, and it lets you lose life to make your shadows come online faster. Then the last 2 cards, 2 copies of Dress Down. You know, it lets you stifle various interbattlefield effects like Snapcaster or Stoneforge Mystic, and of course it also lets you wipe out constructs, which is important because that's like a tool that can otherwise grind you out, that you don't have as many other ways of interacting with. Of course you do have Wasteland in the deck, but you know, there's a Saga, it's not counterable, you can't discard it with a Thoughtseize, all that kind of thing. So having this to kill those is pretty good. And it's having your flex slots be blue cards is also nice because it makes your Force of Will a little bit more reliable as well. And the other nice thing is that as a combat trick, it takes Death Shadow's ability away, so with the Dress Down in play, your shadows are always 13/13, which comes up occasionally, not super often, but nice to be aware of. Then the lands. Oh, these haven't been sorted, so I'm playing. Let's have a look. Okay, so 4 Wasteland. Some people are on 3. I think this card in Legacy is just really good. So I have 4. Not much to say. I'm playing 8 Fetchlands and 2 Underground Sea, 3 Watery Grave, 1 Island. Some people play 9 Fetchlands. They cut, for example, the Island. I'm happy with 8. Like the old Canadian list, they always used to play 8. I like having the 6 actual mana sources rather than the extra Fetchland. That's pretty close either way, obviously. If you have strong preferences for the 9th fetch, I'm not going to sit here arguing with you about it. The 1 Island I thought would be quite good. One of the biggest issues with this deck in the past is that because you don't have threats that you can play on turn 1, playing on the draw versus Delver was like a huge problem because you have to be like terrified of Wasteland all the time. Yeah, because like you just, I mean, I'm sure everybody's played a Delver Mirror or whatever where like you're on the draw to get Wasteland and you just die. So that's compounded, and that issue is compounded in this deck much more because you don't have proactive plays on turn 1 usually. Well, I mean proactive in the sense that they generate board presence, like you have Thoughtseize obviously, but so for that reason the island is important because it lets you turn 1 fetch a land that they can't Wasteland. So you have this sort of established foundation that you can always cast your cantrips off of going into the mid and the late game. So I think that is good, right? But I think Delver is just much less popular now. So I'm not sure if you need this main deck or sideboard or like exactly how that should work. I'll talk about that when I get into the sideboard. In the past, I wasn't playing the island, I was playing the 4th Watery Grave instead. I don't think you need the extra life loss from having 4 Shocklands, especially when you have the 4 Snuff Out in your main deck. Looking at the sideboard, I have 1 Grafdigger's Cage, 2 Surgical Extraction, just tools versus graveyard stuff. Just be a little bit careful when you board in the Grafdigger's Cage because you can't cast your own Reanimates through it. Anti-artifact stuff, I have 1 Null Rod, 1 Energy Flux. If you want, you can play Powder Keg instead of the Energy Flux. That might be a little bit better, I'm not 100% sure. But Energy Flux is pretty powerful knockout versus the 8 cast, so I'm pretty happy with those. Of course, the Null Rod you also can board in versus like Storm or Death and Taxes. Then as my anti-control kind of stuff, or like more expensive grindy things, I have 1 Tourach, 1 Liliana the Last Hope, 1 Infernal Contract, 1 Cruel Bargain, and 1 Mystic Sanctuary. So I think the most common effect used in this like card advantage slot is Court of Cunning, which is a fine card. The like 3 mana enchantment makes you the monarch, upkeep, target player mills. If you're the monarch, they mill 10, like that card. I think that's fine. It's not ideal, the fact that it gets Pyroblasted, for one thing. The other thing is that the card advantage you get off it is much more incremental than with this. So it's like not as impactful the moment that you resolve it. The other issue with that is, of course, your opponent can take the monarch token away from you. So, well, token or emblem or whatever you want to call it, which is a bit scary right now because the control decks, they have the tokens from the Staff of the Storyteller, or they're playing like more flash creatures, like the build with the Fairy Mastermind is relatively popular too. Yeah, so all these things make the Court of Cunning a bit of a liability or a bit of a risk. It's nice that it can be a sort of alternate win con with the mill versus decks where attacking them is a bit difficult sometimes, like lands, for example. But at the same time, lands also has like the Pyroblasts, probably they're boarding in versus you, or they can deal with the enchantment with like a blast zone or something. So it's not so clear cut. In general, I think I just do like the Cruel Bargain just because has much more of an immediate impact in the grindy matchups, which is usually what you want the Court of Cunning for. And of course you have the Mystic Sanctuary to get the Cruel Bargains back. Mystic Sanctuary also good, you can get him to Tourach with it, or Counterspell. So based on my conversation before about the main deck island, depending on your read on the metagame, I think you could play the Mystic Sanctuary main deck instead of the island, depending on whether you're more afraid of Wastelands, or like you think you're going to be playing like grindier long games where you want to like use this in game 1 to get him to Tourach, or a Force of Will or something that's quite strong as well. So yeah, that's worth thinking about, whether you want to play the Mystic Sanctuary or the island main. Then the Liliana and the Tourach. Some people playing 2 Tourach and no Liliana, or yeah. I don't think Tourach is that good that you need to play 2. You have the Legend Rule double up problem. It's not invincible because the control decks will have Dress Down to get rid of it. It's nice versus Death and Taxes, but they can Caracas it, so it's not 100% killer there either. So 1 Tourach seems fine. Then the Liliana, it's less good now as an anti-control thing because it's easier for them to kill it now that Prismatic Ending exists. Of course, Prismatic Ending's not that new anymore, but you know, I've played this Shadow deck for a long time. This is like where my frame of reference is at. But I still think Liliana is quite good. critically for the first effect, it lets you kill things with the +1. So not only is it like a sticky threat versus control decks, because versus control, you can just minus it first and then it floats in terms of the card advantage. And then from there, you can just slowly take it up, and even if they use a removal on it, you're still up a resource. So yeah, it's still not that bad, even though it's relatively straightforward for most control opponents to remove it. But yeah, the fact that you can board it in versus like elves or like painter, you +1 kill the painter, or yeah, anything along those lines. Death and Taxes, obviously, but they have 1 toughness things that you can kill. It's a very strong, like, grindy thing that lets you attack from a slightly different angle. So I'm not too unhappy with the Liliana or the Tourach, but those 2 slots are a little bit flexible depending on the metagame you're anticipating. Just extra removal, I'm playing 2 Fatal Push in the board. I like having 1 mana removal in the side. If you want like more targeted options versus specific things, you can also play Submerge in these slots, or like Sheoldred's Edict is not bad, or Sudden Edict. Probably the modes on Sheoldred's Edict make it better than Sudden Edict at the moment, but yeah, I just prefer Fatal Push. I think the 1 mana is too important versus Delver versus Death and Taxes, things like that. In the last few cards, I'm playing 2 Hydroblast and a Force of Negation. Force of Negation, just like a catch-all card. You can board in versus any type of combo deck just to like sort of make up the numbers, or you board it in versus Loam or Control. You know, it's just like a flexible card that covers a lot of different angles. And then Hydroblast, Blue Elemental Blast is great, obviously, versus Blood Moon. The red initiative stuff, you can kill Dragon's Rage Challengers with it, or yeah, you have a lot of different options. I think the red cards in Legacy, of course, Painter, you know, plenty of red cards there. You have a lot of options to hit with it. And you also have the basic island to help you cast your Blue Elemental Blast in most of those matchups. So yeah, that is the Legacy Death's Shadow list. The sideboard probably has room to change like 1 to 3 cards, or you could even be a bit more generous than that. But like you probably almost certainly want 2 to 3 pieces of Graveyard Hate, 1 to 2 Artifact Hate permanents. You want your like various anti-control grindy things. You want more removal. Dread of Night is another thing you could put in your removal spot. Or like, if you want to go the other way, you have Toxic Deluge or this kind of thing as well. And then you have your more counter magic options too. Yeah, so that you sort of have to like build your sideboard around these sort of silos, just to make sure you have coverage versus all the strategies in the format. So yep, that is the Legacy Death Shadow, and I've been relatively happy with it so far. I was a little bit allergic to him to Tourach for a while in Legacy, which made me not like this deck so much. But I think maybe that was a bit of a overreaction, and Uro is also not quite as popular as it used to be. So yep, now I'm back making people discard their lands again. So that's all for today. If you have any feedback, questions, leave a comment down below. Like and subscribe if you want to see more deck techs like this one. This has been Li-Fi TCG, signing out.